Welcome to the New Judge One podcast. My name is Isaac Kamens. This is a bi-weekly podcast where my friend Jess O'Brien and I discuss internal martial arts, Qigong, and meditation. This week we continue our look at the martial arts of Taiwan in the 1970s and 80s. This time we're going to take a look at a student of Xiang's, Marcus Brinkman. Marcus is out of Denver, Colorado originally, and he also is a student of Lotus Shoes. This is an article from the Journal of Asian Martial Arts from 1999, where Marcus talks about his training with Xiang. In the article, he discusses in pretty good detail the method Xiang used in his Xingyi Quan. So we discuss that. We also talk about the difference between the spine wave method of moving versus the spine pumping method of moving. And in the extended episode, we continue our discussion of Bruce Francis's meeting with Xiang, and we also discuss his encounter with the Suijiao master Chongdeng Xiang. That is exclusively available on our Patreon. You can subscribe for $5 a month at the basic level, or $10 a month gets you the premium. And that has all the bonus episodes, the extended episodes, and all the interviews. So I hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks for listening, and take care of yourselves.
Today, we're going to talk more about the martial arts of Taiwan and sort of dig into the history of Taiwan a little bit and the martial arts there and explore that area a little bit more, particularly around the school of Master Xiang. Today, I wanted to pull some information and discuss it from an issue of Journal of Asian Martial Arts from 1999, an article called The Internal Martial Arts of Taiwan, an interview with Marcus Brinkman by Kevin Craig. And Marcus is pretty well known in the Chinese martial arts world as someone who's translated a lot of articles. He was translated books and has been teaching here in the States as well as living in Taiwan for a long time. And you definitely encourage people to check his stuff out. He posts on YouTube sometimes and puts out some pretty cool lessons. So with that, let's start by taking a look at Marcus's arrival in Taiwan and his training with Master Xiang. Okay, so the interviewer starts off with this. Marcus, you visited Taiwan almost 30 years after Robert Smith wrote his book, Chinese Boxing. Did Xiang resemble the character portrayed in Smith's book? And here's what Marcus has to say. Well, in those 30 years, much of Hung's bar brawler traits receded, while the gentleman scholar aspect of his complex personality moved to the fore. When I met Hung, his house and teaching space were hidden within the maze of alleys in old Taipei. A worn-out, barely decipherable shingle hung above his little medical office, advertising his martial arts school and Chinese medical practice. Hung claimed to be in retirement when I began training with him. As far as I know, besides our small Xingyi Quan class of about 8 or 9, his only other teaching obligations were his Crack of Dawn Qigong class. He was also still active as a head official of Taiwan's Martial Arts Association. So that's kind of cool because in previous episodes, we've gone into detail about Master Hong's life and the stories from Chinese boxing. As you may recall, he's portrayed in Robert Smith's book, he's kind of a brawler and a tough guy who's an experienced street fighter who's making a name for himself in the early 1960s in Taiwan. He's training American GIs, and he ends up being an incredibly influential teacher of Chinese martial arts who's connected to a lot of the other martial arts teachers in Taiwan at the time. So it's kind of cool to get Marcus's view of him in the late 80s when he's an older guy and a more mature, settled person, and yet maintains some of his gruff old school approach. And I love the idea of like this back alley school with the beat up old sign and the peeling paint, and you go into an old medical clinic, Chinese medical clinic to go to a martial arts lesson. That paints a beautiful portrait. Okay, so next he says, Hung's physical appearance was quite intimidating. His body was massive. Although he only stood about 5'9", the girth of his legs, hips, arms, neck, shoulders, and abdomen were extreme. His voice sounded rather hoarse and gravelly. And when he spoke Mandarin, it was often punctuated with spicy Taiwanese slang. Overall, he was a remarkable character. And this speaks to that the vibe that the previous books were all talking about, how, and his students will often sort of he'd sort of tell you about how he just was a rough and tumble and gruff kind of master, with a heart of gold deep down, but he definitely portrayed that Chinese martial arts kung fu master that you would maybe see in a kung fu film or whatever, of just being a, spicy slang and hoarse and gravelly voice. You can really hear that in the videos from the BBC show as well.
Most of the time when he's described by people, that's one of the first things they mention is his size and his quote gravelly voice.
Hmm. Yeah,
Probably,
you can
probably from
picture it.
smoking cigarettes, but
Right. He's a lifelong smoker too. So the interviewer asks, were Master Hong's martial skills as formidable as they were reputed to be? Marcus answers, yes. Hong's inside fighting skills were very well developed. His movements were relaxed and natural. Even in his mid-60s, his sensitivity and power were well maintained. For a man his size, he possessed amazing body integration. His ability to either isolate or unify the various muscle groups of his body were quite impressive. In playful moods, he would sometimes demonstrate his unique abdominal control, leisurely lifting, dropping, and rolling his hefty center. He could suddenly propel himself forward with a powerful spinal wave, advancing his huge mass to a distant point without losing body alignment. This showcased his agile weight shifts and accentuated his drawing and releasing skills. So that's interesting because that talks about those ideals of internal martial arts practice, of being able to, the sensitivity and the power, the integration, but also his movements are relaxed and natural. And again, when you see the films of him, he'll use those sort of whipping strikes and grabs and snatches and like put his body weight behind pretty relaxed type of sweeping movements that look like they could really thump.
hmm the interesting thing about, Marcus's version of it versus like say Kumar's version of it is there's a big difference between a guy in his late 40s versus a guy in the late 60s,
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
and just what um the way in which they move kind of changes over time. And I think that things get smaller and more sort of, I don't want to say lazier, but there's almost this sort of careless attitude towards
Mm.
things that they're not trying to show off. So it has a certain relaxedness to it.
Yeah, that
Where,
relaxedness strikes me as kind of the differentiating point, because like the classical, I don't know, karate like lunge and shout and just the extension and tenseness is completely missing from this stuff.
even in a lot of Shingy stuff, people like to do, where there's that sort of snap at the end of a motion
The stomp and the snap, yeah.
to show the fudging. And I think, for some people that's fine. But I personally think a smoother, more relaxed way of doing it, while maybe not as impressive to look at, is far more advanced, if you will.
And I mean, there's that quest in internal martial arts that you and I have always been on, of like, how can you move the least and get the most power? And how can you be the most integrated and still stay the most relaxed and still create strong effects without that outside, the look and the shout and the jump and the swing that's so characteristic of an external style. How can you still create that same kind of strength, that control, and that I don't know, that just all I can say is that thump that comes from a light arm movement that can really pack a lot of power behind it. And Master Hong seems to really personify that so
Yeah,
well.
I mean, as I understand it, his body method, if it was sort of a combination of Xingyi and Tai Chi, that there was the structural uh, integration stuff of Xingyi, but that he worked into that stuff, the quote unquote body wave of Tai Chi, right? So everything he does has this kind of whippy, as you call it, wavy quality to it. And that develops this type of kind of undulating, much like the white crane type of, movement where it whip in a segmented fashion, right? And I think that was his kind of early training in Tai Chi, and I think it was some sort of crane style.
Oh
you
yeah,
could
their
see.
family's big into white crane.
Right. So
Yeah.
that if you take the combination of the sort of the softness of Tai Chi and that sort of whippiness of White Crane, you kind of see the underpinnings of the way he does things start to kind of develop, and it's like, oh, that's where a lot of that spine wave thing,
Yeah.
you develop the um, microcosmic orbit through doing this physical spine wave, and then that gives you this kind of whippy snappy power, as you like to call it.
Definitely connected for sure. So, okay, the next thing he says, Hung Yishang's power has been well documented, but what about his sensitivity and grappling skills? Marcus answers by saying, Hung's brutish physical appearance didn't prepare you for his acute listening skills, tingjing. His hand and finger dexterity were exceptional and greatly embellished his employment of sticking, adhering, connecting, and following. Partly due to his masterful grappling skills and partly due to his ability to integrate his large mass, Hong was an exceptional martial artist. So I love how his brutish physical appearance is contrasted with his incredible like dexterity with his fingers, and so he could make you really good at sticking, adhering, connecting. So those are those internal ideas of when you touch somebody, you glue to them in such a way as they can't escape from you, and now you can either follow them or pull them into your orbit.
Yeah, and you're using sort of real subtle pressure changes in your hands, sort of like rolling your fingers um, to change angles and things. That was, Bruce's chapter on Hung Yishang, I think, is called like Subtle Hands or something like that. It's like that was kind of his thing, was really good sensitivity with the hands while you're doing, particularly in Rosho, was is his kind of method of doing that, from what I understand.
Yeah.
That the way of transmitting the feeling of doing what he was doing was through Rosho. Maybe less as he got older, but
Yeah, it seems like that was definitely a big part. And the whole thing about grappling, sticking, adhering, connecting, and following reminds me of all the push hands um from the Tai Chi classics that we've been reading all last season. It
mhm.
seems like the Tai Chi emphasis on that ability to touch and to truly connect, it seems essential to all the internal martial arts. Even in Xing Yi, you're striking a lot, but when you do strike, it's sort of like when you hit somebody,
Well,
first you hit them with the hand, your forearms hit to them, and then from there you connect to their forearm, and then drill forward using your fist into their body. I don't know. There's something about that has such a
I mean, sticking,
attractive feeling
following.
to it.
A lot of schools, they'll teach you Tai Chi or Xingyi first, and then Bagua is the more advanced thing. And one of the more interesting things I think about the way Hung does it is, or did it, was um, Tai Chi was the last thing that he taught
Mm,
people, right? That um, Xingyi was the primary thing, and
mm.
Bagua was, if you were good enough at the Xingyi, he would teach you the Rosho and the Bagua. And I think the reason for that was, in his mind, was that the softness of Tai Chi was the hardest one to really develop.
Hmm.
And if you worked that into it's like start people with the structure of Xingyi, and then little bits of that wave start to come into it, like particularly when you're doing two-person activities, right? There's that sort of back and forth and kind of pulling the person in and whipping you
Yeah,
and stuff.
yeah.
That progresses into the Bagua. There's a lot of that kind of following, and especially in the straight line stuff. There's a lot of movements that are very Tai Chi like and Xing Yi like. And then when you do all that, you go to Tai Chi, now you have this sort of repertoire of how to move, and all the mechanical stuff is taken care of. And really all you have to do now is learn how to be soft.
Super soft,
Right.
yeah, which
Which
is
is
pretty
different
hard.
from like most schools of Tai Chi, where it kind of goes the other way, right? And yeah, I think there's a advantage in waiting to do the softness till after you have the structure.
Mm. Yeah,
You
that
know,
makes sense to me. That seems like a great philosophy. So he goes on to say, can you elaborate? on Master Hong's sticking, Zan, and adhering, Nian skills. Hong's sticking and adhering skills were unlike anything I had previously seen. Upon contact, he was able to grab the skin and use it as a body handle. This kind of body handle affords exceptional control over an opponent. The underlying fascia, which weaves into the supporting skeletal frame, may be accessed with a flesh entwining hand maneuver similar to that used by Chinese bone setters and masseurs. The entwining begins with a vigorous rub, which quickly changes into a tight winding up of any excess loose flesh. Hong would use this as a setup and in mid-course change the skin handle to a short open-handed palm strike. Just as easy, he could lead his victims to and fro, paralyzed in his grip. He was able to grasp the flesh on most any part of the human anatomy, including under the arms, around the chest, and even on the face and cheeks. He claimed to be able to tear the flesh in this fashion, and although I never witnessed such, I believe he possessed the power to do so. So that goes deeper into that sense of being able to just grab with a single touch. I like how he describes here, like, at first he rubs the skin on contact and then winds it up. So you can just picture a twisting hand catching your flesh, tightening it and tightening it until he's gripping the very fascia itself, and now you can barely move out of it. I mean, that's something that Kumar used to do all the time in two-person. Anytime he wanted to really grab you and control you, there's
Yeah,
that sense of your body tightening in a net, kind of. It just draws you
it's
in.
the layers, right? So that you essentially have to go from the surface, the skin to the bone, right? In that blink of an eye, right? So what the handle he's talking about, right? That when you compress the flesh on somebody's arm and twist it,
Yeah,
it
that
it
twist is the
it
essential part.
locks it sort of to your hand, and this is where the sticky hands and where that term comes from, is because when you start doing these kind of twisting motions and spiraling motions, it has the effect of your flesh sticks to their flesh, and if you then add pressure to it like you said, it tightens it, right? So
Yeah,
it's a
it's
bit like,
paralyzing is a good way to put it, where you're just like it hurts and the flesh itself is caught up and stiffened and grasped. So it's like a combo of pain plus structural grasp.
yeah, I mean, it's the visual of, if you take a piece of like rattan or something and you twist it, right? The way it will break is it'll start to sort of splinter in the
The
middle.
fibers will kind of rip
Yeah.
apart laterally.
And
Yeah.
it's that effect of, when those fibers start to kind of wind up, everything gets really stuck essentially. And
Like
so,
Kumar will sometimes say that dish towel effect, where you
yeah,
twist the
yeah.
towel, it stiffens up and hardens the towel
Mhm.
under the pressure of that twist. And I mean,
And
in
this,
most great Chinese martial artists can do this. It's not unique to this, but
no, no,
they're
but
damn good at it.
but the thing, I mean, it's why you see like a lot of Bagua Shingi people have big forearms, right? Because a lot of what you're doing is you're using, especially like in Rosho, you're using your forearm to do most of this twisting action and this sort of winding back and forth. This is the reeling, the silk reeling, or right, that as you twist back and forth, your soft tissue begins to stretch laterally and linearly, and it creates this kind of internal connection.
Yeah.
So like in your own body, it's the twisting that's going to hold your arm to your shoulder so your shoulder doesn't collapse when you hit something,
Mm.
right?
So it's the same way that you create those internal physical alignments. You also apply those when you grip somebody and twist them using the same
Right. And
concept.
the only time I met Lotus Shoe, the only thing he said to me was more fingers. Okay, he said it 3 or 4 times, and he kind of did that thing like rolling his fingers around, and it was about that ability to touch with your palm on that first surface or first couple of surface layers, and then you kind of roll your fingers to do the tightening. And that you sort of play. I mean, it's almost like playing the other person like a piano or something, right? You're sort of dancing on top of their skin until you catch a place where you can grab it, right? And again,
You
this is
get
where
that, what do you
that's
call it? A flesh grip or a,
yeah, handle, I think.
yeah, the flesh handle,
But that's where the
body handle.
the adhering part, right, of that whole thing is, it's if you put your hands together again and sort of like you're sliding one up and down the other one, you can feel they'll start to stick to each other. There's that friction, right? So you're learning how to like to use that sort of puffy, soft skin on your palm to
Mm,
connect to the tissue on the other person's body and then twist it um like a towel or something and lock it in place.
yeah.
Uh,
No, yeah, you're right. That relaxation, if your hand is all tense and tight and really strong, you lose that ability
you
to
just slide
squish into
off.
their flesh. Yeah, you could ram into them real hard, but you can't grip that fascia in the same
Um,
way.
the way you open the back of most watches is with a wrench.
Hmm.
The way you open the back of a Rolex is with a piece of sticky stuff. It has because there isn't a place to put the wrench. So you get this kind of like sticky, like silly putty almost,
Uh,
and it sticks to it, and then you can twist the silly putty
mm.
and it unscrews the back without scratching it, right?
That's
It's
like
that
that Japanese architecture where there's no nails or anything. Everything is just like
right,
seated
joiner, yeah.
perfectly.
But it's
Yeah.
like I mean, silly putty is probably the best substance to really
Huh.
to get the sense of what this feels like because
Yeah.
it's the way, if you got a piece of silly putty in your hand and you put it on a wall and you start to twist, it's gonna stick your hand to the wall for a second, right? And
Hmm.
that kind of the silly putty is your palm, it is your Laogong point in your hand or the edge of your palm or your forearm or something that's
Yeah.
got some meat to it to stick to the other person. And that's where that like first swing kind of whippy arm stuff is really, where you can
So,
develop
so
that.
speaking of whipping, okay, here we go. So, what other martial attributes were you impressed with while training with Hong? Hong Xiang was able to produce barely visible ripples or large undulating waves throughout his substantial frame. His precise integration of and control over his body embellished his use of shuaisho, whipping palm.
There it is.
There you go. So that's that notorious where you turn your body and the arms whip off like octopus tentacles or an elephant trunk, like this liquid arm just comes whipping off of a central surface that carries so much weight behind it somehow.
Yeah,
Yet it remains relaxed.
it's like a octopus tentacle or something like it can just whip back at you real fast and where did
Right?
that
But
come
it's
from?
not rigid at all. It's like it's soft and squishy, and
Hmm.
yet it's coming at you with this baseball bat type of
Hmm.
force. And that's the beauty of, in opening the energy gates Qigong that we've done. There's those swings that we talked about a bunch, especially in season one, where you're trying to really cultivate that Swai Shao effect of just turning your body, relaxing the shoulders, relaxing all the joints, and creating that whipping power that to me is definitely one of the, especially the first stage of internal martial arts power that's effective for striking.
Yeah, I mean, in one sense, if you think about that winding and the twisting of the rope,
Mm,
the idea of the most graphic thing I can think of is on a ship when the cable snaps and it just whips through anyone that's standing on
right.
deck. It's that kind of a whip.
Yeah.
It's not a whip like I mean it can be a sort of a floppy whip, but the real sense of it is it's that whip where it's not gonna fold if it hits something, it's gonna cut right through it, right? I mean
Hmm.
it's
I mean, the way you train it is so soft and loose and squishy, but when you whip it, it just tears right
it's like a
through.
blade whipping through you. I
Yeah.
mean, it's yeah.
That cable you're talking about. Yeah.
The Bruce described it in Tai Chi as it's the Tai Chi sword, right? The double-edged sort of Tai Chi sword
More flexible.
that it has the ability to bend, right? And this idea that even though your body doesn't really bend, but it has the ability to kind of whip a little bit. And this is those like you said, these very, it can be done on a really almost invisible layer where it's just like your skin sort of rippling over your bones, or it can be done in this larger fashion where you see the big body movement and everything. Usually you train it in a larger way to get the feeling of it, and then it gets smaller and smaller as you use it. But like again, this is where I think Hung's like bird and Tai Chi training, because both the White Crane and Tai Chi really develop that kind of whipping motion, and
For sure.
it's
Maybe
a
that's why
very,
he was so attracted to it. Yeah.
I mean, it's it might be the most powerful type of movement you can do. I mean, I think that it's what a baseball player is essentially trying to do when they swing the bat. It's that where your
Everything you got.
body, your body's just ahead of the arm, so it creates that whipping motion. And or if you're using a sword, it's the same thing. And so there's this kind of like Chen style Tai Chi is probably the most well-known thing that does it, right? Where there you can see the kind of back and forth sort of whipping motion
Hmm.
at the end of almost every movement. But it's in lots of other things, like you said. It's
Yeah.
just.
It's out there. So he continues here and he says, as a method of making contact, Hung could apply whipping with just his fingers, inflicting stinging welts all over the body's surface. As a maiming assaultive maneuver, he could unify his mass with enough force to break bones and rupture organs. In teaching, he stressed a smooth entrainment of movement, starting from the ground, routing into the extremities, and issuing through strategic junctures on the arms, hands, or fingertips. In training, he stressed versatility of this skill and taught many of its alternate uses and modes of power.
That's the
So, yeah.
string of pearls, right? That's
Uh-huh.
the
So, Baihua's book that we talked about last season a lot kept referring to this concept of the string of pearls, where the whole body's linked and unified as if a series of gems on a necklace, and that they all move independently, but in a sort of order, in a consecutive function. And
right. Well,
so, like
that's
he
what
says, routed from the ground into the arms and extremities and out through the hands and feet or whatever.
right. But before that, he said he could either do it as a like a segmented thing or integrate the
Mm,
whole thing, right? And
mm,
that's where again, if you think about that, string of whatever on a pearls or rocks or whatever on a rope, that if you connect them all, it becomes a baseball bat, right? But if you disconnect them all, it acts like a sort of like a slinky, and the idea is that you have the ability to do both, right? This is that um, yin and yang, essentially. Again, I mean, the type of movement that you do in Xingyi and Bagua really develops that kind of silk reeling, right? The ability to like twist everything to make it one piece and then untwist it to make it into a bunch of pieces, right? And that back and forth starts this, quote unquote, whipping action.
yeah. So the final discussion here of whipping, he says, Taiji Chuan, Bagojong, and Xingyu Chuan all utilize whipping. While this Jing is common to all three, its Xing and Yi, shape and mind, may be altered according to a variety of circumstances. The dimensions of the wave within whipping palm may vary in size, symmetry, and tempo, while the quality of mind directed through its length may vary according to usage. For instance, whipping is sometimes used from a distance, as if throwing a large net. In this case, its wave starts out as large and circular, but at the end of its projection, hooks inward sharply. Whipping may be short and stinging or large and engulfing. Upon contact, the power can change instantly from hard and immobile to soft and supple. With the addition of rotation throughout the arm, whipping becomes a variation of rise, fall, and overturn. Whipping can sometimes be shaking, coiling, turning over, adhering, sticking, connecting, following, and so on. It is suitable for either short or long jing release and allows good control after impact, hence its adaptability as a grappling tool. So I mean that says it all pretty much, and just so much variety and ability to use whipping in so many different ways. Like you were just saying, like it can be long, it can be short, it can be segmented, it can be all connected at once. Like that net effect he describes, where you whip out in sort of a big soft motion, but then whip it back inward really harshly and yank them in, kind of. that would be one way to use whipping.
Sure, yeah, that's a great. I mean, that's the best sort of best example I think is that one. The way I've heard there's actually a video where Marcus explains this, but I've also heard Bruce explain it this way, and that um there's kind of, I mean, there's lots of other ways you do it, but the two sort of main ways that people develop this type of undulating power is either through a whip, like a wave, or you do it through a pump, like a linear opening and closing. And Bruce tends to do it through an opening and closing. So you can open and close in a sequence, and that will give you the effect of a whip, but it doesn't actually whip the spine. Where the thing where you make a physical wave with your body gives you a little extra external kind of feeling of what you're supposed to do. And I think the goal of that method is that you do that enough till it becomes so small that that wave is almost invisible. But
right, you can use it instantly, but
yeah, because
some development. You got to start big. And
I mean, it's the same with the, if you're doing the opening closing method, that you have to exaggerate it a little bit in the beginning,
sure.
And then when you actually get to the point of using it, I mean, that's the thing, when you use them in actual technique, they almost are the same, because at speed, an opening and closing and a wave don't look that different. It's two different kinds of waves. It's like a tidal wave versus a crashing ocean wave. Tidal wave just moves forward in this sort of slow linear, heavy kind of wave. A crashing wave goes up and then it comes down, and it has that sort of, thing to it. So those both get used, for example, in Tai Chi, they both get used in different movements. And I think, like, you can adapt what you're doing. Like he said, I mean, you can use that method, any method really, but those two methods primarily, to produce any of those other, things, those sticking and all the things he mentioned.
Right.
But it's like you have to have something that's getting the pressures in your body from point A to point B, without getting stuck. So
it's really, really insightful from Marcus there, talking about Master Hong's body abilities. Like, most people haven't written about it so articulately. So it's pretty cool to hear it described like that. So now I wanted to rewind back to the past, maybe 15 or more years, to when Master Hong had a much bigger, more commercial school in Taiwan. B.K. Francis had just arrived at the school with the intention of challenging anybody who would be willing to fight. And he gets kicked out because, of course, that's incredibly rude and no one would allow it. But so the son, Hong Zizhou, goes to his dad to talk about this foreigner, this Western fanatic of the martial arts who's arrived at their school. And so he goes to tell his dad, Hong Yishang, about this visitor. Hong Yishang says this: "I know this guy. Mr. Suzuki told me about his behavior in Japan and the trouble he caused the Japanese martial arts world. He not only created a ruckus and assaulted people everywhere, he also swaggers around, provoking people with his slanderous intentions. I heard that he had ruffled the feathers of a Yakuza organization, and they were getting ready to settle the score. Within the Japanese martial arts circles, they are, however, worried that in the off chance something really bad happens, there may be no way of explaining it to the American government, so they've purposely created a plan to lure him to Taiwan. They prepared a bribe for Taiwan gangsters to take care of this guy, passing the problem over to Taiwan to avoid offending the American government. So if we let these underworld-linked martial arts gyms fight with him first, this guy will probably return to America in a pine box. Okay, contact him and tell him to come to the gym tonight," Hong Yishang said.
Hey, folks, if you want to hear the rest of the episode, you can subscribe to the Patreon for $5 a month or $10 a month for the premium. We also have Facebook and Instagram pages where you can see images to go along with the episodes. All right, take care of yourselves and be well.